We are back with Chuck Z. We're going to talk about the influence of foreign coaches on national teams in this World Cup. So, Chuck, historically, you could not win a World Cup with a foreign coach. That's always been something that has been talked about. Very rare to win any international tournament with a foreign coach. And then that changed when Otto Rehhagel led Greece to the Euro 2008 title. But then since then, it's reverted to kind of domestic coaches winning the European Championships. Copa America, it changed when in 2015 under Sampaoli, Chile won the Copa America, actually beating Argentina, his native country, and so that has evolved since then. Although again, that has reverted back. But Sampaoli won 2 Copa Americas with managing Chile, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, and then it reverted back. So this kind of glass ceiling has been broken, and what you're seeing now is football associations throughout the world go and look for the best available candidate. It used to be, Chuck, that you would only see developing nations do this. Now you're seeing the very top footballing nations, the Portugals, the Englands, and even here with the United States and Canada, here in North America, nations that were in the past very reluctant to hire foreign coaches. I remember Canada went through other than the German coach they hired, they went through a cycle of Canadian coaches who, quite frankly, weren't Dale Mitchell, Frankie Allop, who just really, Stephen Hart, weren't good enough, right? But they were all Canadian, so they got the job. Now, there's something very, very different going on in international football.
Well, having foreign coaches is nothing new. What's new and magnified here are the ones who are basically the contenders. Usually the contenders like Brazil and Germany and Argentina would have a homegrown coach taking them and making them the team that is almost closest to winning. France would have a French coach, and they still do in this one. But what we're looking at are previous champions like Brazil having an Italian coach, England, previous champ, having a German coach. And these kind of things are different, much different than what we're used to seeing, because those are supposedly such developed footballing nations that they have a great coaching core to choose from. Most of the clubs that play in those places or former players that have played there are reliable and have led those countries to the championship. But for the first time, we're seeing it's almost like a desperation that you cannot call from your domestic football a leadership and a coach to take and rely on that coach to take you to the championship. And I see a lot of fallout because, you're only going to have one champion. That means somebody is not going to be happy with the coaching change that they did, the traditional coaching change that they have had in the past. But also looking at this field of 48, you're seeing just a slew of nations that are having coaches that are not domestic, while their countries also have a foreign coach. So, for instance, England has a German coach, but there are English coaches for other nations that are here at the World Cup. You have Brazil having an Italian coach, but you have other countries having French, Spanish, Italian, Danish, German, Moroccan, Australian, all over the place. So it's a very interesting dichotomy that's going on. And the idea, it's almost like you're gambling on somebody outside of your federation to lead you to success. And that's very interesting. One of the things I'll point out is that Italy is missing from this World Cup, and yet 3 of the nations have Italian coaches. And I find that very strange.
Yeah, I find that very, very fascinating. In fact, Fabio Cannavaro managing Uzbekistan is fascinating. And you mentioned Brazil. I forgot to mention Brazil with Carlo Ancelotti hiring a non-Brazilian or Portuguese coach for the first time that I can remember. And then obviously Uruguay has had a succession of Uruguayan coaches. Most recently, the great Tabarez. And They've gone and hired Bielsa, which, by the way, I don't think is destined to end well. The Bielsa's tenures have generally not ended well in places, club or country, with the exception of Leeds United, where he's still beloved in England. But but they still felt like they had to progress their playing style, so they had to go and get the professor, the master, the maestro of a certain style of football. So how much is tactics playing into this? Because I know for England, having spent time around their camp and having spent a lot of time around England, the England camp when Roy Hodgson, who was English but had done a lot of his club football managing in Scandinavia specifically, but still was very English in his mannerisms. In the English FA felt this time they needed a tactical evolution to a certain style of football, which is kind of the Gegenpressing German model, if you want to call it that. So they hired a specific manager to reflect that. But Chuck, the ultimate question is, these are still international tournaments that are snapshots in time. They're not club. This is not club football. So how much time does a manager have to implement a specific tactical style? The Bielsas, the Tuchels, the Ranić. Ranić is another example with Austria, a German coach who has a very specific tactical style that I myself attach myself to. That's, he's maybe my favorite thinker about football in the world. But it's a national team, right? It's not a club team where you can pick your players arbitrarily. So how does this work?
Well, this is something historically that is trendy. And when I say that, in the 1930s, 1920s and 30s, you had many coaches coming from Britain because the British were the inventors of the game. Hungary was successful in the early days, and so a lot of Hungarian coaches went around the world. If you look at after the 1970s, how many Dutch coaches, through the success of not only their national team, but the clubs in Holland, a lot of Dutch coaches went around the world, and they were the prominent ones. And if you look right now, there is the success of Argentinian. There are 4 Argentinians coaching non-Argentina teams here at the World Cup. France, which again have had great club success and of course recent world success, there are 5 French coaches not coaching the French national team. So there is a trend to gravitate towards successful nations, in other words, the current champion or past champion. And then there is also the idea of the weight of the clubs and the success of those leagues that attracts that. England is a perfect example. When you look at the Premier League when it first started, how many British or English coaches were in the Premier League? And as it progressed, you had French coaches come in. You even had Brazilian coaches come in. You had coaches from elsewhere. And that wave or that trend would change as the success of the different clubs and national teams unfolded.
Yeah, and I think that is a real interesting dynamic now also, because you have so many foreign coaches in domestic leagues that there are almost there's a view that there are foreign coaches that are better and much more equipped to manage a national team that's not their own, but where they have coached long term. And one place I have to say we've seen this phenomena in the past is Mexico. One of the co-hosts of this tournament, Tuca Ferretti, has managed the national team, I think, on a couple different occasions. He's Brazilian, but his entire post-playing career has been in Mexico as a coach at the club level. I know there are other examples with Mexico too, right? Ricardo Lavolpe had managed in Mexico and therefore was given a turn at the national team. And then you see with England, Tuchel having managed Chelsea in the Premier League. And you see this also, I think, when it comes down to some of these other choices. I mentioned Ranić. I think Ranić's connection to Austria is not that he's German and that makes him a German speaker, but that Red Bull, which hired him to implement his view of football, is actually an Austrian company, even though he's German. So he managed Red Bull football at the club level, and because it's an Austrian-based company, multinational company, but based in Austria, based in Salzburg. He ends up not managing the German national team, but managing the Austrian national team. So that has there's also a business and sponsorship component to this.
I will add this to this whole idea is that most of these national teams now, and I would say probably a good 60%, you're getting players that are pretty much ready-made. In other words, years ago when you might have had teams from Asia or Africa or even CONCACAF, there were a lot of untrained or not at the highest level of players that were available for your squad. But looking back now, even with some of these smaller nations, many of the squads are made up of players that play in Europe or with leagues that have established professionalism. And so when you're calling from that, you're going to get a little bit of a better squad that doesn't need so much the basics, but really just a cohesive tactics. And the United States is a good example of that, because if you go back to 1990, and what Bob Gansler, the coach at that time, had to put together was a mishmash of some players that had played in Europe, some played at college level, some played at club level, lower club level in the United States. And then you fast forward here to 2026, you got players that are playing in some of the best leagues in the world, at some of the richest clubs in the world. And so you're bringing a well-seasoned professional in. And now your only real job is not to teach them how to play the game at a high level, but to find the chemistry between them to have the tactics and the success. And that's a different type of coaching than it is to bring in a lot of green players and very different level of players that